Hello, everyone. Welcome to While the Ghostlight Burns. I'm Sarah Lynn Holt. I'm the Artistic Director here at RS Theatrics. For those of you who are not familiar with RS, we are a small professional theater company operating out of St. Louis. We are in residence at the Kranzberg Arts Foundation, and our mission is to produce shows that have never been professionally produced in the St. Louis metro region before. Our hope is to add valuable voices and perspectives to conversations that are important in our community. Obviously, we're not doing too much on stage right now, but we want to keep having those important conversations. And that's why we're bringing you While the Ghostlight Burns. We are talking to theater makers from the St. Louis region and working in the St. Louis region about different topics that are important in our theater community and the ways our theater community can serve important topics in the greater community. Today, our guest is Chris LaBanca. He is the founding and executive director of Solid Lines Productions, a local to St. Louis nonprofit theater company that fosters community action through theater about socially relevant issues. Though he grew up on Long Island, New York, and spent 6 years in living in Buffalo, New York, after studying theater at SUNY Geneseo, knew I'd get that wrong, before moving to St. Louis in 2012, Chris is very happy calling St. Louis home. He's an actor, having last performed as Marcus Andronicus in St. Louis Shakespeare's production of TITUS Andronicus. He put his acting on hold after becoming a parent for the first time and out of a desire to spend more evenings at home with his wife and son, whom he adores. He last directed a reading of Stephen Belber's tape for Solid Lines Productions. He has also served as the director of drama at SUNY Alfred and as the education coordinator at Shakespeare in Delaware Park. Please join me in a raucous round of applause we won't be able to hear in welcoming Chris LaBanca.
Hi.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it is my pleasure. So I'm going to start you off with what has become my traditional opening question. What does being a working artist look like to you, for you?
Well, excuse me. The working artist, I think there are a couple of different definitions of that. But for me, the ideal and where we should be is being able to ply our craft for compensation. And that ends up being a really, really sort of a strict interpretation. But I think that no matter the circumstances, we should be paid for our work. And so I think I've never really met an actual, like, somebody that I would consider an artist, while at the same time considering them lazy. I think we all grind. I think we all work really, really hard at what we do. And so I think that, for so many of us, it means jumping from one project to the next, not just necessarily to make ends meet, but also to itch that creative scratch that so many of us have. And I think there's something that's really, really cool about how quickly we jump from project to project. And there's also something that's kind of risky about it too. It's easy to overcommit. So to me, there's a difference between working artist, I guess, and healthy working artist. And I think that a lot of times our circumstances can make it difficult to be healthy working artists. And so that grind looks different for a lot of different people. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm not sure that it does now that I'm thinking about it.
No, I think that this is sort of a question that is open to interpretation for everybody. So whether that is, well, in the morning I get up and I write 3 pages or something more big picture like you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I've thought a lot about the big picture lately because, as you say, with the pandemic on, it's not felt like I've been able to do a lot of artistic work. As you mentioned, I've got a son. He's 3 years old, and while I adore him, he used to spend 2 days a week in daycare, and I would spend those days in the office. He's not in daycare right now, so I'm very, very fortunate. I get to be a stay-at-home parent, and that's amazing, and that's time that I wouldn't trade ever for anything. But the fact of the matter is, now I have very, very limited time to work on my craft. And so as a result, I found that instead of spending 2 days in the office, trying to get things done. I'm falling behind right now. It's very hard for me to juggle all the things that I did before because I used to find the odds and ends of time in addition to my time in the office to do that work. And right now I don't get that luxury. So for the past for the past 2 months or so, I'd say I go into my office after my son goes to bed and I sing him a couple of songs. He goes to sleep and then I sort of head into the office because nobody's there. And I just work through the night. I work till dawn on Saturday, come home and get Eli up and wait until my wife wakes up and relieves me. And then I crash for a little while. So it's not ideal, but I think right now we're all trying to find time where we can find it. And at the moment, that's where I can find it.
Now, you have the outside office still?
Yeah. Yeah. So Solid Lines Productions, we operate our administrative office out of Nebula Co-working. And for anybody who doesn't know, Nebula Co-working is amazing. The corner of Jefferson and Cherokee. Really, really love this space. We've got a little office there, but they're also like drop-in desks, which is how I started. I am very easily distracted. Being in theater has actually been a really good fit for me because I do jump from project to project and I like finishing things and then moving on to something new and theater has allowed me to do that. So it's easy for me if I'm in my own home to sort of go all Doug on it while I'm working on something. I'll grant proposal and go squirrel, and that's it. I'm gone. It's going to take me at least 10 minutes to get back to wherever I was. So being able to go into my office at Nebula, sit down at my desk and work while I'm not at home. That's also a designated work area. You know how they say that, when it comes to your bedroom, keep TV out of the bedroom. Like you really, otherwise your brain starts to associate that with something other than sleep. It's sort of the same thing for me in work. So having that designated work area really helps me focus down, especially if it's a task I don't necessarily feel like doing.
So sort of moving sideways into this, tell us about Solid Lines, how it came to be, what it does, purpose in the community.
Sure. So Solid Lines Productions, we foster community action through theater about socially relevant issues. And what that means to me is having a service model of theater, because that's what theater has done. Theater serves the community and it serves the needs, so if you're going to if you're looking back at like shamanistic practices and for performances that mean something to the community, what does the community need at that time? And that's what the performance and that ritual, that's the purpose it served, right? So it wasn't just entertainment. There was a specific purpose that these performances and these rituals had for the communities. And so performance is ritual, and I think it should serve the community. I think we ask for a lot of support because we don't get a lot of support from on a national level. We don't get there are a lot of, for all the theater companies we have, and that's not even counting like the artists, the musicians, the other types of artists. For theatrical artists, we don't get a lot of support. Almost no matter what city we're in, we don't get a lot from the federal government. Here in St. Louis, there are a couple of organizations that we can go to, like Missouri Arts Council, Humanities Council, Regional Arts Commission, but we all go to the same wells because we feel like that's what we have to do. And in my opinion, that shouldn't be the case, but because it is, the result is that we end up asking our community to support us. They need a good reason to do that. They need a reason to want us around. It's not just because we're funny. That's a good reason, but it's not the only reason. So I really think that it's important that we serve the community by giving it something it needs. And so that's where Solid Lines comes from, is this notion of, okay, what kind of conversations do we need to have in the community? What kind of plays do we need to produce? And that drives a lot of my artistic choices in terms of, okay, what are the shows we're doing? Who are the actors that we're putting on stage? What do our casts look like? It can be kind of tough because a lot of our shows can end up being kind of heavy. We talk about issues like domestic and sexual violence, poverty. We just recently started talking about period poverty, anti-trafficking, racism on all sorts of different levels. Mental health issues has been another big one for us. And we partner with people in the community and organizations in the community who already do the work. So organizations like St. Martha's Hall, they're astonishing. They've been for decades now. They've been a shelter for women and children fleeing abusive relationships here in St. Louis. They do incredible work. We've partnered with of course, now everything else is going to fall right out of my head. It's unfortunate because I've been really, really lucky to partner with a lot of these other organizations that combat things like human trafficking, the National Council of Jewish Women. So working with them, distributing their information, making sure that we're distributing facts and not just stories, and resources and not just stories, has been really important to me. And then, talking to our partners who've been boots on the ground in St. Louis for longer than I've lived here, that helps us determine what does St. Louis actually need versus what do I think it needs. And I think that is really where you and I have had this conversation a couple of times, Sarah, in terms of how easy it is from a position of privilege to decide that someone or something or some community needs something. And then here I come and I just say this, that I'm a straight white guy, puts me at the top of the socioeconomic pyramid. And so that allows me to come in and say, hey, this is what you need. I'm giving it to you. And it's all too frequent that when somebody does that and there's pushback, someone who looks like me is going to get defensive and say, well, I was just trying to help. See, this is what happens when people try and help you.
Mhm.
And the way it flips so fast is really astonishing. So for me, that's where Solid Lines lands, is this idea of how do we serve the community and make sure that we're talking to the people in the community so that we're actually giving people what they want and what they need versus deciding what the community needs.
How long had you been in St. Louis when you started Solid Lines?
I had just moved here. I knew this was a thing that I wanted to do. I'd started back in Buffalo, New York, doing something called the Aegis Project, and I produced a production of Bill Master-Simone's Extremities, and did it much the way that I did it when I moved here. But I did it in Buffalo, and we toured through 7 different colleges and universities in the Buffalo, Rochester area. And when I moved here, I didn't really see anybody who was doing what I wanted to do. I think there were definitely a couple of companies that were doing socially relevant work and continue doing socially relevant work. But it wasn't coming out the way that I thought it would be successful in different ways and mean something to different people. And so to that end, I decided to start the company. And one of the first things I did was create something I call the Executive Creative Council. And these are artists in the community who have been just amazing and fabulous in how they've dedicated their time and their energy and their thoughts and their insight to Solid Lines in terms of what St. Louis does well, what we do poorly, what we can use, what we're not ready to talk about yet necessarily, where we can push the boundaries and boundaries that shouldn't be pushed. So that's been really, really helpful in terms of how to take that approach. And honestly, there are a couple of people specifically like Fox Smith, who's a local actor, designer, just all around astonishing, cool person that she does. She's been on my executive creative council basically since the start. Carla Lambus Evans, who served in basically every capacity possible in Solid Lines Productions. So those 2 people specifically really, really helped me get a better handle on St. Louis and maybe where we were coming up short and where Solid Lines Productions could help fill in the gap and the need.
And when you say that there weren't companies that were doing things the way you envisioned, the format that your shows take on is perhaps not what people would immediately think of when they hear you run a theater company. Can you talk a little bit about the shape that your shows take?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of what we do are staged readings. And staged readings are, we've got actors, they wear what we often call just actor blacks, which is black, no logos, nothing like that, just nothing distinguishing. So they could be wearing anything. And then the actors have music stands, they have scripts in front of them, and they perform from the scripts. So they're not memorized. And then you have somebody off to the side reading stage directions. And it's sort of, to me, it's always been the difference between reading a book and seeing a movie. And I think there are some plays that don't translate well to stage readings. Like I would never go see a stage reading of Noises Off. That sounds terrible because you're missing out on all the physical comedy. But there are a lot of other shows that I think work really, really well that way. And in a very, very strange way, what I discovered, and I discovered it completely by accident, in Buffalo, when I was doing Extremities, which is a play about a woman who's assaulted by a man. She manages to turn the tables on him, and then she has to decide whether or not to kill him because he attempted to rape her, but she hurt him and there's no evidence that he assaulted her. So she's worried she's going to go to jail. So what's she going to do about it? And the woman playing Marjorie at the time, she hurt her ankle while she was on stage, and so she couldn't perform in our production. There was no way I could have somebody step into that role holding a script while still doing the action because there's combat. So I had to, and this was right before our show at University of Buffalo. This was like our flagship performance, and I was really, really anxious about it. This literally happened, I think, the night before that show, and so I had somebody step in, and we just did a staged reading of it, and it was incredibly effective because the violence that happens on stage, the sexual violence that happens on stage, if you hear it but you don't see it, it can still absolutely be triggering, but it doesn't have the same effect on the audience. So when we have a talk back after the play, which is has always been part of our model, when we do a talk back after the play, people were unable to ask questions. They didn't really want to be part of a conversation. They were still processing what they had seen. With the staged reading, people were disconnected enough from the action because they could see it in their minds, but they weren't seeing it happen right in front of them with people who are sweating and right there next to them. And so there's just enough detachment that we could have a conversation about what we saw, and people could be affected, but not so affected they couldn't speak. And so that ended up being the model that we really based Solid Lines Productions on. It also allows the shows to be shorter, which means that the talkbacks aren't as much of an imposition on our audience. It meant that, for us, we could run more shows in a year than if we were doing full productions, because we do pay all of our actors and we pay them for rehearsal time as well as performance time. So, obviously that gets pretty expensive, but we don't want to shortchange our actors. So shorten the rehearsal process, make it less of a commitment. It also meant that we could work with a lot more actors because we're doing more shows, but also if it's just a staged reading, it's 3 to 4 rehearsals tops and a couple of performances. It means they could be working on another show and still do hours. So that particular model of having the conversation and trying to get to a place of action was something that I wasn't seeing a lot of, and the organizations that I did see it happening with weren't having the same kind of conversations that I wanted to have. So this was my opportunity to sort of throw the bowl of spaghetti against the wall and see what stuck.
So along with not having all of the trappings of a traditional production, it means that your show basically fits in a box.
Yeah.
And the actors following you in the door.
Yeah.
Which really broadens the potential performance venues that you have. So you touched on the fact that each of your shows generally involves a community partnership with a nonprofit, but you also are taking it to different locales, partially based on what shows you're presenting and what audiences you want to make them accessible to, correct?
Sure. And this is where I just have to interrupt really quickly to say, Sarah, you're like astonishing. There are 2 people, for anybody who doesn't know, there are 2 people in the theater community that I know of that see like literally everything, just everything. One is Carl Overly Jr., which at some point you're going to see him in the audience. That man works so consistently. He is one of the hardest working actors I've ever met. He grinds so hard. It's astonishing that he makes as many shows as he does. Sarah Lynn Holt is the other person who sees like everything. If you are not familiar with the hashtag Hold It Steady, literally other people, when they see shows, they will use that hashtag because Sarah sees everything in this town, which is amazing because most of us in the theater don't do that. Some of it is we don't have the time or the energy. Sometimes it's the money. For some of us, it's not the interest in seeing work we haven't produced. So the fact that Sarah does this, because Sarah's been to so many Solid Lines Productions shows, that she knows the company, and also she's directed for us. So that was my quick aside that I'm like, I gotta say this now because you've set me up. So thank you for all that you do for this community, Sarah. But also, touring has always been part of my model as well, because there are 3 major barriers, documented barriers to people seeing live theater. One is ticket cost. We eliminate that by having free admission to all of our performances. That has always been true. That will always be true. All of our performances are free to attend because ticket cost should not be a barrier to having important conversations about the community that you live in. And I don't think we can rightly uh, occupy the niche that we claim to occupy without addressing that. Two is transportation. Transportation is another of the three big barriers to people witnessing the arts. And so it's great if we have an awesome space, and it's great if we offer free tickets. If you live in North City and you don't have transportation, if you live in South City and don't have transportation, you can't. It's not easy to get to us because this city is terrible when it comes to mass transit. It's great that we're free. You're not going to ever come out and see anything that we're producing. And then the third major barrier is time, which we can only do so much about. You're not going to see us producing O'Neill with 3 intermissions anytime soon. That's the best we can do. But yeah, touring has been really, really important to us to get into, to be in the communities that we're asking for their support, but we're also saying, hey, we want our stage to reflect your community. So we're going to come and we're going to bring actors, and hopefully you see a story that matters to you with people on stage that you can relate to. And we think that that's really important. So that is one thing I will say, though, that I think has been a shortcoming for us. I'm proud of the work that we've done, and I work with astonishing people, but I think, not living here in St. Louis has made it really difficult for me personally because I'm playing catch up. And so anytime we fall short on where we perform, that's on me, because I've tried different approaches, such as like tracking the bus routes. Where are the bus routes, and where do the most routes intersect? We should be performing there because it's easiest to get to from that perspective. It's a great idea, except that kind of groundwork requires a lot of time that I haven't had, and a lot of reaching out and following up that I didn't have. It was great that we were performing in a couple of different places, but 2 of them were located in Grand Center. Okay, well that's not bringing shows to the communities that we're targeting here. So we want to be accessible by everybody. So I think that's one place where I, as executive director, I have felt that we have fallen short. And I think year after year, we keep trying to bring it to different places who want to see us, different colleges and universities, different community centers, that sort of thing. But that's one of those areas where it's like, nope, we keep falling short. So we got to keep pressing forward and trying to learn and make positive changes.
And I think that's an area that theater makers and the theater community as a whole could probably stand to pay a little more attention to, is transportation accessibility. It's
Absolutely. You talked about it with Mr. Adam Flores back in the first episode, and talking about. I remember talking to him about it's not actually called Shakespeare in the Streets at that point, was it? What was it? There was a specific title for it, but I can't remember what the program was called.
I don't recall either.
Yeah, I apologize, Adam. I know it's thought of as Shakespeare in the Streets, and getting on a ferry to see the second half of the performance. Like he said, he's like, I never thought I would ever know the ferry schedule as well as I did, but that was the thing I had to do. And they were focused on transportation, and so you end up with all of these people who don't have to worry about it. They're going to get to see this show in 2 different places, and it's all taken care of because that's something that the festival really cares about. Is, okay, how do we actually serve the community? It's not enough to come into the community and do a play and go, there, see, aren't you glad that we were here? No, you've got to make those connections. You've got to really breathe the same air that they do, and have the same considerations that they do. And so I agree. I think that there are a lot of companies that could do a much better job of taking care of transportation, and there are a couple that really make sure they address it, and the festival's one of them.
And even relatively simple things like I was recently in a conversation with a venue about information on the website.
Mm-hmm.
For patrons. How easy is it from the point of view of someone who is not intimately familiar with all the operations of this to figure out things? And it came out that there was lots of information about where to park your car, but no information about what bus stops or Metrolink stops were anywhere near the venues.
Absolutely, and we've been guilty of that as well. It's not something that I necessarily think about. I found that I'm trying to juggle so many things at once that for me, just sometimes just getting the show up, ends up being more work than I anticipated. And then I fall short in other areas because, like you said, I mentioned where parking is, but then people are like, oh, okay, what if I'm not driving? And that brings me up short a little bit because I've had a car, since I moved here. So I agree. I think that's something that there are a lot of those instances. I think we see it a lot in, like, we see white American theater and the list of demands that were published in terms of things that we should be doing. We should all be doing these things. And yeah, some of them are harder to attain than others, but some of them are really super easy, and there's really no excuse for not doing it other than, well, I haven't done it before, so if I don't make it a priority now, I'm going to forget about it. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that we all need to do a better job of going, okay, well, parking is great, but also what about buses? Well, what's the closest Metrolink stop? For sure. Yeah.
Um, so looking back, pre-Solid Lines, pre-St. Louis, what was your personal journey like towards realizing that you wanted to center the place of social issues, of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of these values that are not separate from theater completely, but are not necessarily 100% meshed with it all the time? How did you come to wanting to center that in your theater work?
Sure. I was really, really lucky. I only started doing theater in high school as a way to make friends. That was it. They needed guys, and I'm a guy, and so I fit the bill. And I kept acting into college, and then I did a play called Tracers. And Tracers is about soldiers in Vietnam. It was directed by Dr. Randy Kaplan, who became my one time mentor, and adopted Jewish mother, because I just adore her and her whole family. And so anyway, and it's funny actually because a friend of mine from high school got to see me in that show. It was the first time he saw me act since high school, and he was like, "Chris, that was really good." I'm like, "Thanks, man. I really appreciate it." He's like, "Yeah, no, I mean, in high school you were awful, but like this was really good." And I'm like, "Thanks." He's like, "No, no, no, like really bad. Like you were terrible." And he just, like, he wasn't trying to be mean, but his mind was kind of blown. And I was like, "All right, it's starting to feel a little personal." But Tracers, we had a Vietnam vet advising us on the production, as well as a veteran Marine he had served in Kosovo. And this director, Randy Kaplan, I had never gotten to work with her before. This was my junior year of college, and I'd never gotten to work with her before. And so I was told by everybody, like all the guys in the department and outside the department were auditioning for the show. They're like, "You really got to work on this show. This is going to be amazing. Like, you got to audition. You got to audition." And I was very lucky. I got cast. Out of all the men who auditioned, I was one of 8 who was cast by this director that I hadn't gotten to work before. I was frankly intimidated by. And so working on this show really, really, we're not just in it for laughs, and there's no improv that happens during the play, because that had been my experience, was like, if you throw in a line here, who cares? Like, it was all very casual. But working on this show with these vets who helped us get to this place where we could try and be as authentic as possible, despite none of us having served, despite none of us being alive during Nam, and then having Vietnam veterans in the audience say, "How did you guys make it so real? How did you know that was the rhythm of speech, the cadence, that sort of thing?" Having other people be affected by our performance, that was really, really big for me, in terms of, theater can be more than just entertainment. That runs parallel to a very, very dear friend of mine. Uh, she had introduced me to Harry Potter, and there was one night that I got home drunk, and I was watching Harry Potter, and I like texted her. I'm like, "Hey, I'm watching Harry Potter. See, you made me like an addict." It turns out that my text message woke her up, and she woke up next to a man she'd never met before without her pants on, and she was panicked. She didn't know what to do. She called me back, and I went out and I found her, and I spent the entire night trying to convince her it wasn't her fault, but I was woefully unequipped to support her, right? Because my first reaction was, "Who is this guy? I'll kick his ass." Which is not helpful, and it's about me and it's not about her. And I don't know any of these things, and I don't know what to do. I just keep saying it's not your fault, and I'm trying to explain logically why it's not your fault, and it's not getting through, and I can't understand why. And the next day I started to that feeling of impotence in the face of somebody that I really cared about going through a really difficult time, and not being able to do anything about it, and then starting to learn about it in the following weeks, and learning about the different things that I had done to contribute to rape culture, even though I've never assaulted anybody. the things that I had done and not been aware of made me feel ashamed and awful. And, up to this point, it had always been, I feel like I'm a good person. Um, but here I am contributing and not thinking about it because I've never assaulted anybody. That makes me, by definition, a good guy. So those two things happening around the same time meant that I wanted to use my craft to have a positive impact. And so domestic and sexual violence is where it all started for me, which is why Extremities was the first show that I ever produced. I did it at SUNY Alfred when I was director of drama. I did it again at when I was touring for the Aegis Project, and then I did it again as soon as I moved to St. Louis. I've now put the show down, and I will for a while. But as flawed as it is, I think there's this amazing quality to Marjorie, but also Raul, because he's funny, he's charming, and people would go, "Well, why would you ever believe him?" And it's like this is why you'd believe him. So being able to put a story on stage and then reach people and have a conversation about it, I was fortunate to have the people in my life that I had so that I could learn from those experiences. My director, my friend who has a strength and a courage that I will never know. Um, and then all the people, as I tried to sort through my own emotions and my own reactions afterward, who helped me and have continued to do so through the years. So Randy also had started an Asian American performance ensemble called Ginseng at SUNY Geneseo. And so I got involved with that. I started doing Ginseng as soon as I had done transfers. And yeah, I'm obviously always playing the white guy or I'm backstage, but I had grown up around friends in Korean households, Korean friends, and been invited to their homes for meals. And so I had this privilege growing up of being invited into other communities of people that, as I got older, I didn't realize that was a privilege. I just assumed this is how everybody grew up. I never knew that people grew up in communities of all white people and had never met a Korean person before. So I had that privilege of growing up in that community on Long Island. And then I had the privilege of, as I continued to grow, all these other people that if I made mistakes or stumbled along the way, they'd be like, "Hey, I know what your intentions are, but here's where I run into a problem with something you're doing." I've been the beneficiary of people in marginalized positions and marginalized communities hearing my intention and gently correcting me and calling me out when they need to, but always thinking about where my headspace is at. And that's not really a fair demand to put on them at all, but I've been very fortunate to be the beneficiary of that. And so the more frequently that sort of thing happens, the bigger my debt grows to serving the community. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's sort of where it comes from, and where that drive is, if you take a look at Solid Lines Productions and you look at all the various actors and the playwrights and the guest directors and the people on the executive creative council and on the board of directors, all of these astonishing people that dedicate their time to making this a better organization, have also made me a better person. And I know of no way to repay that debt except to learn the things that they've taught me, whether they meant to teach me or not, and then implement those things.
So that experience that you had with Asian and Asian American theater, that's carried forward into Solid Lines. And I don't think it's an official subset of the company or anything.
Well, no, it's not.
As I'm aware. But you can definitely tell if you look at the different shows you produced over the years that you have a sustained interest in shows that come out of and depict Asian and Asian American communities, issues, interests, which I'd like to talk about for a second, because I think before seeing those shows come out of Solid Lines, I want to say I'm tempted to say, but I will just definitively say, because I have heard it from people, had heard it in the past, that we don't have Asian American and Asian theater artists in St. Louis. Maybe you could find one for a part in a show, but producing an entire show where the cast is Asian or Asian American, totally a fool's errand.
Hmm.
until you started doing it. So can
Yeah.
you talk about your experience in producing those shows that have the reputation of being unproducible in our market?
Sure. I hate it. I hate the response of we can't cast that show, we can't cast that part. It makes me really, really angry. I am by nature an angry person. And and oftentimes I found that in my position, I have to be really, really careful because is that anger for other people or is that anger my own? And if it's my own, then I've really got to push it to the side. And this is one of those instances where I get really, really angry because there's so many great scripts out there. So many scripts that are never produced, never touched because they feature more than one Asian or Asian American actor. And I think, this is going back a little ways. This is a couple of years, but there's a St. Louis Metro Theater Facebook group, and somebody had posted a call for actors of different ethnic backgrounds. And I think one of them was they were looking for Latinx, a couple of male Latinx actors, and they didn't get the responses they want. And this person was white. The director was white, and specifically made a point of saying, here I am putting out these roles, and I really thought people would jump to him, but I guess I was wrong. I'm very proud that this community jumped on him so fast because he deserved that. Um, the fact of the matter is there are definitely times where there are teaching opportunities. He was not taking those teaching opportunities, but I think this is what we see in theater a lot. We see this notion of like, um, so for example, I tried to produce. This is I think 3 years ago now that I tried to produce Paper Angels, and I love Paper Angels. I think it's a wonderful play, and it features, if I'm not mistaken, four Asian American men, five Asian American women. It's five Asian American women, maybe it's six Asian American men, and it's just a really, really excellent play. And we had it cast, and then after a lot of work, some actors had dropped out for reasons that they couldn't control, and so I was stuck with this production and no Asian American men. And in that moment, the notion of becoming upset and saying, "Here we are putting on this show for you." No, 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 no. Stop right there. You've already gone too far. And I think Mr. Flores and I think that Mr. Darius Varner spoke about it as well. I think both of them talked about this idea of like, don't act as though you're some sort of angel for giving me an opportunity. Um, so it has been my experience that I am very fortunate that when I decide that I'm going to put on these plays, that people respond to the audition notice. And not only do they respond to the audition notice, but they will talk to other people in the Asian and Asian American communities and try and convince them to come out and audition. My experience has been that a lot of the Asian and Asian American actors that I've worked with here in St. Louis, excuse me, don't consider themselves actors, and they would never think of auditioning if they hadn't sort of been pushed by people they know to audition. And the reason why is because if they've auditioned before, they've not gotten cast, or they've only been called when they're needed for one specific role, or they're written off, or auditions aren't really set up for them. So my experience has been that the communities out there, 4% of St. Louis City is Asian or Asian American identifying. I know 4% doesn't sound a lot, but in a city as big as we are, we're talking, I think the math comes out to anywhere between 4 and 5,000 Asian and Asian American people. You can cast any show with that many people. Um, and I think there are people who want to perform and maybe don't necessarily, have the know-how to do it. So we need to go into the communities and we need to be a presence there. And my experience has been that this is where I disagree with some of what uh, Adam was saying in the first episode. I think that if you don't have the people to produce a show, I agree, you cancel it. You don't cast somebody else and, God forbid, put them in yellow face, which is what we saw just a couple of years ago. We've seen it several times in the past several years here in St. Louis, which is awful and inexcusable. There's no excuse. You don't do the show, but I don't think you necessarily need to have somebody in mind when you produce a play like let's say Kimchi and Chitlins. I don't think you necessarily need to have the show cast before you decide to do it. So in that case, I was fairly certain I wanted Fox Smith to play the lead role, but I wasn't sure about the other Asian American roles because there are three of them, and we managed to cast it. And then obviously things fell apart when we tried to produce Paper Angels. That was unfortunate, but I still had five Asian American women. So instead, I produced Valina Hasu Houston's Tea because that's it calls for five Asian American women. So boom, you're done. But I think that sometimes we need to keep making the attempt. And if I say I'm producing this show and I need three Asian or Asian American actors and they don't show up to my auditions, that's on me. That's not on people who didn't know that we existed, who didn't know we were trying to tell a story about them. And also, we need to be consistent. So every year that we have, for every year that we've been in existence since I think our second year, we've produced a play by an Asian American playwright featuring Asian American performers. I'm pretty sure that for the past 5 years we've done that consistently. And then this season we actually weren't necessarily looking at that, but in a little bit of a weird way that I'm going to speak to in a little bit. We actually are producing a show about Asian American experience by an Asian American playwright anyway. So I think you have to keep trying, and it's easy to get frustrated, especially if they're plays that we want to produce. And Sarah, you've talked about this in a couple of episodes now, of this notion of, yeah, but I want to produce this play, so this is the thing I'm going to do. Right. And how that's a problem in not just our theatrical community, because this happens elsewhere too. I've seen it in Buffalo. It happens in other cities. But I think we have to keep trying to prove that we're committed. And then we need to keep finding new inroads into the different communities. If that makes, I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question in a bit of a roundabout way.
Mm-hmm. I was actually recently thinking about the incident you brought up with the producer who was unable to cast their show. No. It was very much a prime example, and I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, the part that he was unable to cast that triggered the whole very unfortunate choice of messaging to the community was a Southeast Asian role.
Oh, then I'll take your whatever you remember it being, because I didn't remember exactly. I just remembered this attitude of, look at what I'm doing, and it puts the onus on the performer. You should have been here because I was doing this for you, but you didn't step up. This is why we don't do shows about you people.
Yep.
That's the message that's being sent. So I knew this brilliant and really, really just brilliant actor named Hara Kong in Geneseo. And I was very fortunate to work with him on Tracers and a couple of other shows through Ginseng. Amazing actor. He did voice acting after he left. He'd been on off-Broadway shows. But he was never a theater major because there was only one director who would cast him. Just one. And that was Randy Kaplan. She was the only one. And it's ridiculous because he is more talented than the vast majority of theater majors in that school. Way more talented. But, if you're not going to cast him, or you're not even going to consider him, why would he be a theater major? Why would he be an actor? I believe that we, as producers, as directors, as audience members, and as actors, we are all lessened by these people who we drive away from the theater. And as we drive them away from the theater, our experience is lessened, and we don't even know it. We don't even realize it. Because we haven't had the experience. So there's nothing that we can compare it to. But then everybody freaks out over Hamilton and how great it is. It was kind of terrible because we produced a reading. Oh my gosh. And I'm forgetting the name, which this is never, at some point the theater company reaches enough of a length that I start to lose titles of shows. I used to wonder, how could a director forget, or an actor forget a TV show they worked on? But this is actually a thing that's happening now. It was Marcus or The Secret of Sweet. We had produced a reading of that. Beautiful play, all Black cast, and just these wonderful actors who some work regularly around town, some don't. All are great. And then we produced it that was the first year that we were invited to the St. Louis Theater Crawl and the Grand Center Theater Crawl. And after we produced it, somebody actually came up to us and said, how many of these actors came from out of town? And I think it was Carla Landis Evans who was there and said, none, they're all local. She's like, really? I didn't realize we had that many black actors in St. Louis. Well, one, you should probably go to the Black Rap. That's a good place to start, right? But two, that's terrible. That's a I'm not blaming her or anything. If she didn't know, she didn't know. But shouldn't she know? If you attend theater in St. Louis, that's what we should be seeing. That shouldn't be this idea of, well, if you have that many actors of color on stage, they must be coming in from out of town. No, and I think the other element is that too oftentimes we hear this notion of, well, you cast the best person for the part. So the reason that Asian and Asian American actors aren't getting these roles are because, the white actor was just better. It's got nothing to do with color. Well, that's nonsense. It's nonsense. We're setting them up to fail because I have auditioned for a lot of theater companies and I've done a lot of shows. I am going to be better at auditions than somebody who generally doesn't show up to auditions. So if you keep casting me over, say someone like Hurrah, you're missing out. But you're doing it because the system has set Hurrah up to fail, because you're always looking at how I audition. So I think that, I think that's something we see not just in St. Louis, but across the country. And it's why we see White American Theater, this list of demands, which, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know, you can find these online. That's why they're so important. Because as long as we keep talking about casting the best person for the role, I think we end up with really white stages just because of audition technique and experience.
And length of resume and the number of people I see on that resume that I know that I can ask about you. And
absolutely. And you're absolutely right.
So when you're looking at managing solid lines, how do you balance your desire to give the space and voice to the underrepresented groups that you're committed to representing, with the fact that as the person at the head of the company, you are a person with relative privilege in most of those aspects?
So again, I'm really lucky. From a very young age, I surrounded myself with people who are smarter than I am, and that's always been very, very beneficial. So for me, transparency is really, really important. Something that I've learned is really to assume best intent, but acknowledge full impact. And laying down ground rules is really important. Making sure that there's safe space and accountability. So we're not big enough to have an HR department, but we have our executive creative council. We have my board of directors, and I make sure that my actors and my guest directors have access to both of those boards, because if they have a problem with me, they need somebody that they can talk to about it. And also, I think that, as somebody who really I have privilege on every single level, as could be defined. I can't be the only one who makes decisions. So having the executive creative council review all of the guest directors that I submit for approval, as well as all the scripts that I submit for approval before we declare our season, that has been huge. That's been huge because it helps to get insight from people who are in some of those marginalized communities who know me well enough to assume my best intention, but also can help me acknowledge my full impact. There's some people that, again, I've been very, very fortunate to know. So Mr. Darius Varner is one of them. He's been on my executive creative council for a couple of years now, and I've worked with him on a couple of shows, but he's always willing to lend me counsel. The same with William Humphrey. Adam Flores, he's been another person who's given me insight, really, really valuable insight. Fox Smith, Carla Landis Evans. I've been very, very fortunate to have people who offer me insight and then help correct me when they see what I'm trying to do, but maybe that's not the right approach to be taking. So transparency to me is really, really important. And also, well, along those lines of transparency, being deliberate in not just the words I choose, but the way I approach them. So when Jackie Chambers was directing Marcus or the Secret of Sweet, she assembled a stellar cast. I could not wait to see this cast, could not wait to work with them, even though I was just producing. And I talked to Jackie and I asked her, I said specifically, are there rehearsals you want me to step out of? Are there rehearsals you don't want me to be there for? And she said, yeah, there are. She's like, I want you for some of them. I said, no, that's fine. But I made a point before she answered me of saying, just so you know, whatever your decision is, this doesn't impact current or future employment with Solid Lines Productions. This does not affect our current professional relationship nor our friendship. And I think that being transparent about those things and laying out those expectations is extremely important, because uh, I've never had an experience where I've been personally burned by a producer or a director, but I don't know a single BIPOC or woman who hasn't had that experience, right? Which just is one more level of privilege for me. So laying out those expectations, being clear about them has been really, really important. Again, I'm an angry person by nature. When I'm feeling that anger, identify the source. What is this about? Is it because if this is about me, and this is something that I was fortunate that I had people to help guide me through this as I was learning more about domestic and sexual violence prevention. As a man, even if I'm showing up to help, if I am upset, uh, I'm a threat, right? And so, um, knowing about the way that I come across, because I'm a very passionate person, but if you don't know who I am, I don't just come across as passionate. I may just come across as angry, and that makes me dangerous. It just does. Um, so I think being aware of my anger, where it's currently residing, and what it's about has been really important. Surrounding myself with people who are smarter than me and have different experiences than I do, and stepping back has been really important for me. So bringing on guest directors for the past several years, the way that we have, I think it's been 3 years, maybe four, that we've brought guest directors in to direct our plays. I haven't directed a play. I directed tape as an educational program, but I haven't directed a play for Solid Lines, like a production, in at least 2 years. I miss it, but not everybody needs to hear my voice. I do enough talking, as y'all can tell. Um, so transparency has been very important to me. Talking to people who exist in the community or exist in that space, making room, being clear about setting expectations, and then always striving, right? Because um, too often we have tokenism take the place of true diversity, and we've got a lot of buzzwords, and a lot of us, to me, the difference between being sensitive and being politically correct, if I'm being politically correct, this is about me trying to save my own butt, right? I'm just trying to make sure I don't get in trouble. So I'll check these boxes, but it's so I don't get in trouble. Being sensitive isn't about being politically correct. Being sensitive is just not wanting people I care about or respect to be hurting, and I don't want to be the source of that hurt. So I think that's really important too. Is coming from a place of sensitivity and respect and love. Really helps me personally uh, push towards a more diverse company. And the thing is, we'll never get there. We never will. We'll never be diverse enough, right? Because when you look at all the plays that we produce, one show that features Asian or Asian American artists is not enough. It's just not enough. Now, it's cool that we do it. I love that we do it, and we've cast Asian and Asian American actors in other productions too, right? But one a year isn't enough. The Latinx community, so many great playwrights, so many great performers. There's not enough. There's not enough opportunities. So we'll never get there. We'll never be diverse, right? It's a journey. It's a journey the entire way. Um, for me, it's really important that even though it's not part of our mission, that at least half of our season is written by women playwrights, by female playwrights. We don't always hit that mark. We try really hard, but we don't always hit it. So again, we have to keep taking that next step.
And I think something you didn't explicitly mention here is also the fact that you are not programming. You're involved in programming, but you're not picking the plays
Yeah, yeah.
that do each season.
I think that it's important so Darius talked about this. He talked about how, yeah, he talked about uh, how too often what ends up happening is people want to pull you in and they tell you what the project is, and he'd always wanted to produce his own work, or well, he didn't actually want to produce his own work, right? That's what he was saying. He didn't want to produce it. He wanted to see it on stage, but he didn't want to be the one producing it. And that's something that I think, and Shuli said the same thing. I think Miss Shuli Cook said the same thing. She's like, what I learned from producing was I don't want to produce. I want to write and I want to see it on stage, but I don't want to produce. There should be more opportunities for directors and writers to see their work on stage without having to start their own theater company. We don't need yet another theater company that started because nobody will produce your work. That's not a good reason to start a company, and you shouldn't have to see your work performed. You shouldn't have to sink a ton of money into seeing your piece on stage because there are just no opportunities. So for me, it's been important as we bring on guest directors. I've been introduced to so many new scripts that I didn't know anything about by directors who came in and they said, I really want to produce this, Chris. And I read the script and I'm like, that's amazing. I didn't know anything about that. I'm so glad you introduced me to it. Let's do it. To that end, I did not know about Jeannie Sakata's Hold These Truths. Wonderful play about Gordon Hirabayashi and how he fought against internment, Japanese internment camps. And it's this amazing history that I never learned about. And I didn't know about this play until Randy introduced me to it. And that's sort of a thing that we're actually doing this year is we're going to be co-producing with Ginseng this season. It's a one-man show, and Randy's going to direct it. And we're really, really excited about it. And that's something that sort of fell into our lap. But yes, I've been very fortunate that I have these directors who come in with a play that they want to produce that fits our mission. Or if it doesn't fit, then they do reading and they introduce me to other scripts. So that's, you've talked a lot about theatrical literacy and how important it is to try and stay on top of it, even though it's a river, it's a gushing river that never stops. It's impossible to keep up with all of it. This is a way that I keep up with theatrical literacy. I don't even have to do the legwork myself. I have people, frankly, like you, who come to me with scripts, and now all I got to do is read them. It's pretty amazing. So again, I think when I'm looking at any decision for Solid Lines, does it help the community? Yes. Then that's important to me. But how do we benefit from it? How do we benefit from guest directors? How do we benefit from more diverse playwrights and artists? Because that's important too. But we do benefit, and we should be able to acknowledge that. And that's another way I think it's important to work towards diversity, holding a place of privilege without holding it. I'm not doing anybody a favor. I'm learning too. I'm benefiting too. And if I can acknowledge that, then I'm not doing anybody a favor. I'm just doing something that helps both of us. So to me, it's been really, really helpful to have guest directors introduce me to new work.
And I do want to make it clear how amazing it is that Solid Lines does have open director calls.
Oh, thank you.
Because it is so rare. It shouldn't be.
Right.
But there's only a handful of companies that I can think of in the entire time I've been in St. Louis that have put out an actual call for people to submit.
Well, and how can anybody, and again, this comes back to our BIPOC actors who don't have an opportunity to hone their skills. It's the same with directors. How, the idea of, well, I'm going to have to direct this play as a white guy because I don't know any black directors. Do your homework. You'll find black actors out there who want to try their hand at directing. And then you get to produce the show that you want to produce, but you really shouldn't be directing. There are shows that I feel comfortable directing. Then there are other shows like Fairview that I adore. I can't put my hands on that because I don't have enough experience with the source material and I don't occupy that space. So could I technically direct it? I could. I don't feel comfortable directing it, and it will never have the impact that it needs to have coming from me. So if we're not going to create spaces for people to cultivate their craft, how can we be upset when those people don't answer our artistic calls? I don't think it's fair, and not everybody has the luxury of going to school for directing. And especially if you're a BIPOC artist, you may love the theater and you may be fantastic at it. If nobody's willing to give you a chance, except when I need to direct that Asian show that I need you to direct, why would you become a director? You can't make a living off of it, so why would you bother? So for me, it's a matter of let's do the legwork, put the opportunities out there. If people don't answer the call, we have to figure out what we're doing wrong, because the problem isn't everybody else. The problem is us, and we have fallen short before. You have to be able to acknowledge when you do that. You have to be able to acknowledge when you didn't do enough to lay the groundwork in a community. You have to be able to acknowledge when you didn't leave enough time, or you didn't have translators for the audition notice, like things that we take for granted in our positions of privilege. Um, it's I put out a call a year ago, I think, for standardized patients, and and I had somebody very generously say, "Hey, do you mind if I repost this in Spanish?" Yes. Well, no, I don't mind at all. And yes, I appreciate it, but it's something that I should be thinking about so that other people don't have to. Right. And so by taking that approach, um, I think it makes it better for us. And also, again, Solid Lines benefits from having guest directors in. I mean, does it all work out? No, of course it doesn't. But as more people become aware of what we're doing, we get better and better directors. And those better directors make better productions. And those better productions, frankly, get us bigger audiences and get us more grant dollars. So, no, that's not the only thing I'm thinking about. Again, in the interest of transparency, we benefit from the programs that we're doing, and we have to be able to acknowledge what the benefit is, if it's tangible, what does it look like? Because now we can explain this is why we're investing in it. This is why you, as another theater company, should invest in it too. This is why your stages should be more diverse. You complain about having empty audiences, or having difficulty tagging donors, or maybe you've got your audience base is older and you're looking for new young blood. Well, the city is huge. Don't just go for young white people, right? Like, reach out into other communities that I think the Asian American community here, communities, I should say, because it's not just one big community, right? There are a lot of very different communities. Even there's no Chinese community. There are 3 different Chinese communities in St. Louis. There are audiences that want to participate. They want to be part of it. But if you're not going to tell their stories, why would they ever come out?
And your point about in order to get directing experience, you shouldn't have to start your own company. It's I just want to point out that not hyperbole at all. I, for years, heard when I said that, well, my goal is to be directing, the response was, oh, well, you're going to have to start your own company. And people were 100% clear that that's how you get to direct shows, is you produce them yourself, which is obviously a ludicrously high barrier.
It is. It's an insanely high barrier. And then we have the nerve to complain about all these new upstart theater companies. And, the pie is only so big. So now, because of what you're doing, instead of me getting $10,000, you get 2, and you get 2, and I get 2, and see how you're harming the theater community. I'm sorry, you can F off. Like, the opportunities need to be there. This isn't your specific domain. And it's nice that for you can produce whatever you want because you have, you're married to somebody who can support you, or you're living off of residuals from a TV show or from some books that you wrote. Like, it's nice that you can do that, and good for you. That's however you make it work, man. But then we get upset when other people horn in on our territory. Make the opportunities. So many people don't actually want to start their own theater company. I'll be honest. I love Solid Lines Productions, and I love the work I do. I've been doing it for more than 6 years now. We're entering our 7th season, and I was doing the work before that. Um, at some point you want to move on to other projects. I don't want this theater company to be my theater company, until I'm in my 60s or my 70s, or 80s, and I'm forced to pass the torch. I want to build something that is worthwhile enough that I can pass it on to somebody else, not as a responsibility, but as an opportunity. I want to be able to pass this off as an opportunity to somebody else who can take the company to greater heights than I ever could. And I think that the only way to do that is to train people and give people the opportunity, so that we're not just picking somebody at random, or I'm not just picking a friend, right? It's, hey, look at this very long list of directors we've worked with, because I love the staged readings we produce, but at the end of the day, that's actually not my only goal. My goal is to get to a point where we're big enough where we're producing 6 readings a year. We're also producing 2 to 3 full productions a year. I can't the idea of me directing 2 to 3 full productions and 6 readings a year is ludicrous. Why would anybody want to do that in the first place? But like, the more directors we evaluate through our readings, I can bring those directors up to stage full productions, and it's less risky that way too. Because with a staged reading, if it doesn't work out, I invested relatively very few dollars in that opportunity, as opposed to a full production, which has gone horribly wrong, and now we're really sunk because I made a mistake. I shouldn't have picked that director to direct this full production, and we get hosed. So I think that we need these training grounds, we need these trial runs, and if we can't offer the classes, and if our artists aren't paid enough for their work to pay for classes, then we have to give them the opportunity so that they can learn, and so that our best talent doesn't leave St. Louis. So for me, it's all upside. It's all upside.
Well, our hour has gone by.
Yes, it has.
Shockingly fast. So before we're out here, I want to do our shout outs. First off, your producing company for this evening is RS Theatrics. We, as I said, are a small professional theater company, and we are currently in the middle of a fundraising campaign that we would very much appreciate support for. I'm going to drop a link to our fundraising page in the comments. We are currently under a matching donation offer right now. So if you donate now, your donation will be effectively doubled at no extra cost to you. And 100% of that will go towards helping the company survive what is going on in 2020 and get us back on stage again in, fingers crossed, 2021. And now I'm going to toss it over to you, Chris, to tell us what we're looking at here.
Oh, thank you very much. And please, everybody, please consider supporting RS Theatrics. They do really, really important work in here in St. Louis. And we're very pleased to have them as part of the St. Louis community and call them colleagues. And your artistic life is better for having them as part of our fabric. So please consider supporting anything you can to RS Theatrics. I know I'll be doing that tonight as well. What you're looking at is our Solid Lines Productions Patreon page. We know that a lot of people can't necessarily afford a lump sum donation, or it can be kind of intimidating. What we offer at Patreon is several different giving levels, where like you can see the lowest level is $5 per month, and it just automatically charges $5 a month. But I got to tell you that money really, really helps us. Again, we don't charge admission, so we don't make any money from sales. Our big fundraiser for last year got canceled, and so we had a fundraiser in September. That's What She Said, an all-female comedy night. And any support you can give us means that more actors, more artists are getting paid, because we do pay all of our actors, all of our directors, all of our playwrights, and our artists are local. The vast majority, I should say, are local, because the actor doing Hold These Truths is not local. But yeah, we appreciate any support that you can give us, because to us, it's very important that we serve the community, have these conversations. And if you check our Facebook page, we've spent the past 8 months now of the pandemic really trying to spotlight our partners, our community partners, like St. Martha's Hall, like National Council of Jewish Women, who have done so much for this community. Old North St. Louis Restoration Group, they're another great organization. So if you can support us, we can keep spotlighting them, expanding their reach. I know it's a lot to ask, but this helps keep our artists paid and producing good work. So thank you in advance for your consideration.
And I did drop the link to the Patreon in the comments on the Facebook feed as well. So you can find both of those there. And thank you, everyone, once again for joining us for While the Ghostlight Burns. If you missed any of our previous installments, you can find those on our Facebook page, on our website, and on our YouTube channel.
Go watch them. They're great.
Thank you. They have been wonderful to produce so far. I wish we had 5 hours to do each of these, but
I'm sure our audience doesn't, but
we
yes.
respect the audience's time. Next week, we will be talking to Tress Curzon, who is an intimacy director and a faculty member at SIUE. And we're going to be talking about intimacy direction and its role in theater in general, and its role in particular when we're talking about theater in an age of social distancing. I'm so excited to hear what we have to say in that conversation, because I don't know. I do not know the answers to the questions I'm going to be asking her. So I really hope you all will join us again for that next week. In the meantime, be well, everybody, and thank you for joining us.